These are the things that usually cause people to get started in this work. They want to see a whole transformation of our local economy, a whole transformation of our local food system. Maybe projects like creating a local currency, or starting a renewable energy cooperative, or creating a regional food hub that aggregates produce from different farms and distributes it out over the region. But in the beginning, it's really hard to do that. If you don't have any money, you don't have any recognition, how do you get the support behind that and the resources that you need? So
this is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey everybody, this is your host, Neil Collins. Welcome back to another episode of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. It's a pleasure today to have Don Hall coming to us from Colorado. And Don is the training director from Transition US. But Don, welcome to the show. Before we get into anything else, I just want to say thanks for coming on here.
Great to be here.
So Don, I have got to say, we can take this into a lot of different directions. But first, for the listeners that are not familiar with the Transition Network or Transition Towns, which is this kind of global movement that's going on, can you give a 30,000 foot view of what the transition movement is?
Yeah. So Transition was started in 2005, 2006 by a permaculture teacher named Rob Hopkins. I imagine most of your listeners are familiar with permaculture, but in case they aren't, it was a movement that started in the 1970s in Australia, initially looking at how to create a permanent agriculture that could exist indefinitely into the future without destroying the earth upon which it depends. But gradually the principles of permaculture, which are really rooted in indigenous practices and in the patterns of the earth, got applied to economics and governance and energy and economies. Basically every aspect of our lives as modern people. And that was kind of the foundation from which transition sprang. Most permaculturalists tend to be focused on the scale of a single household or homestead or community, eco-village, where the transition movement seeks to engage whole communities, so towns, cities, regions. And so the first transition town was in Totnes, England. And they had great success doing a number of impactful projects, creating a local currency for their area, doing a lot of work around local food sovereignty and food security, engaging their whole community in dreaming a better future, and then starting to work to put that vision in place. And some nearby towns recognized what they were doing was really working. that it was really changing things. And they started to try to adopt the transition approach. And from there, Rob Hopkins, the founder, recognized that there was a need to share this out more broadly. So he wrote the Transition Handbook in 2008, and that really spread the movement around the world. So now transition groups exist in 50 countries on every continent around the world except for Antarctica. And it looks very different in different places. It's really encouraged to adapt to the unique needs and resources and interests of the people in each local community. But there are things that tie the whole movement together. There's a set of principles. There's a general approach to how we do this work. And there's a kind of similar worldview, looking out into the future and seeing the kind of trends that are unfolding and the challenges that we're facing at this point in history. And the idea is, together, if we can affect substantial change in local communities all around the world, throughout this country, that we can really model a new way of living, a new way of being that is holistic and provides a credible alternative to the status quo. And from there, we can see bigger changes happening at regional, national, global levels.
That's a great 30,000 foot view, Don. And what I love, some of the language that I picked up on with transition is a movement of movements and really being able to build that field. And I really want to get into that, but I think the best journey in is really how you got into transition and the work that you're doing. So maybe we can back the story up and really frame it with where you grew up and the kinds of experiences that you've had to enable this journey into the transition network.
Yeah, so I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is a fairly wealthy suburb of Boston. And, it was kind of the picture of the American dream, of prosperity, little league baseball games and cookouts. And even though everything seemed very, perfect and normal, I think I always kind of knew that something was off, that it wasn't as real as it seemed, that there was something else bigger going on in the background. But it wasn't until I was in high school that I started having some experiences that confirmed that. Getting introduced to Eastern philosophies for the first time, and learning meditation, going on an outward bound trip and spending time in nature, and being really influenced by one of my instructors on that outward bound trip, who was a very kind and dynamic and strong and gentle person. And kind of was the first time I had met anybody like that. He was ex-Marine, African-American guy with massive dreadlocks who created spontaneous poetry for his students and taught me Tai Chi. And I suddenly realized I'm like that. Because before that, I was kind of a rebel without a clue, I would say. typical teenage stuff, sneaking out of the house, and hanging out with girls and drinking and smoking, that sort of thing. And I think the combination of those things, meeting somebody who represented a real alternative to that, spending time in nature, having some kind of different insight, different perspective on the world, really set me on a different path. A lot of things in my life changed overnight. I repaired my relationship with my parents. I got very interested in art, became a vegetarian almost overnight, really concentrated on my studies. And so when I moved to New York City to do undergraduate degree at NYU, I got very deeply into politics. I started attending anti-war demonstrations, anti-globalization demonstrations, helped to run the New York University chapter of Students for Free Tibet for several years, and started to get to know that kind of activism. But that didn't completely sit right with me either. There was a lot of aggression, a lot of exaggeration of the facts, a lot of asking big business and government to make changes for us, and they weren't always that receptive. So went looking for a different kind of activism. I knew that was something I wanted to do. I wanted to give back for all the things I had been given, for the tremendous privilege that I had had in a very suffering world, a world that really needed change. And so I did a number of things over the next few years. I actually worked for Outward Bound, working with at-risk and adjudicated youth, leading 20 to 30 day flatwater canoeing trips in the wilderness of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. I worked at Organic Farm. I volunteered with a climate action group locally that got our city to sign the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, and gradually came to felt that climate change is the big issue of our time, the big overarching challenge that we face. But there weren't too many jobs available to do this work full time back in 2006 in Sarasota, Florida, where I was living. So I decided to go back to school, and I did a master's in environmental leadership at Naropa University here in Boulder, Colorado, where I live now, and kind of stumbled across the transition movement. There was an organization called Boulder County Going Local that was part of a re-localization network that was under Post-Carbon Institute at the time. That was the precursor to the transition movement here in the U.S. And I started as an intern, got hired on part-time while I was still going to school, and then full-time after I graduated, and helped to fill out the application to become recognized as the first official transition initiative in North America.
So you've really seen it grow since then. If you're saying that Rob had founded it in 2006 in the UK, you've really been with him for quite some time.
Yeah, so that started in 2008. I started working with Boulder County Going Local, which became Transition Boulder County, which became Transition Colorado. But I was still working for someone. My mentors, Michael Brownlee and Lynette Marie Hanthorne, who had founded the organization, and really learned a tremendous amount from them. But I also had lots of ideas of my own. I was particularly interested in leadership development. And I realized, though, that in order to be able to teach people how to do this, I really had to have that experience of starting a group from absolute scratch in a local community and seeing how it gets built up over time. And so I moved back to Florida and started Transition Sarasota. I served as executive director for about 7 years, and most of our work focused around growing our local food system. That was really the primary leverage point that we had there. That was what people were most passionate about, where the most momentum was, and had a fair amount of success doing that. But at the end of 7 years, felt like it was time for a change. I was feeling a little burnt out myself. And it just so happened around that same time that I got invited by Transition US to give a couple presentations at the North American Permaculture Convergence in California. And I hesitated about going, but eventually did, and reconnected with a friend of mine who was the executive director of Transition US, and she invited me to be co-director with her. So in 2017, became co-director of Transition US and has been working with the organization for the last 5 years, with a particular focus on training and leadership development. Just stepped out of my role as executive director to take a sabbatical to start writing a book about all of this.
Oh, that's exciting. And maybe that's a good entry point, Don, into, you've been on the formation committee or the formation of a transition town or a local initiative to really, how can we entertain the thought process of what it takes to develop something locally, and how does that tie into such a unique organization where you've got local initiatives that have different names. They're not all branded Transition, Boulder, or any other town name, but then it fits within this larger national and international framework. And that's where I think a lot of juice is, and it'd be great to kind of squeeze on that. And I know that there's a framework that Transition has put out there called the 5 stages of transition. Do you think that's a good route in to start to talk about this?
I do. As you said, transition is part of a much larger movement of movements. As big as transition is, say about 1,200 groups around the world, it's still just a small piece of a much larger movement that includes local food movements, permaculture movements, new economy, alternative economy movements, social justice, climate justice. It's, as Paul Hawkins said, the largest grassroots movement the world has ever seen. But oftentimes we don't see it because these groups aren't all connected. They're not all under a single banner. That there could be, groups doing great work in community on many different issues, but they're not all tied together into a movement that's visible and connected and holistic. So I think that's part of the work that we need to do to really change the world, is to connect those initiatives up. But what I think one of the really unique things that transition has to offer is the transition approach, which I think is quite brilliant. And it's taken a number of different forms over the years. But the one that has been most compelling for me is the 5 stages of transition that Rob Hopkins, the co-founder of this movement, put out in a 2011 book called The Transition Companion, which was mostly overlooked at the time, I think because of its complexity, because he had sorted some 40 plus ingredients and 20 plus tools into these 5 stages. But I think the 5 stages themselves are really useful and comprise a kind of theory of change about, how do we go from, one individual being inspired to do this work in a local community, may not have a whole lot of resources or connections, and how do they build that up into a movement in that community that has the power to change that community's future trajectory? And then how do we connect all these local efforts up to show a whole different way of living, an alternative, a credible alternative to the status quo? So the 5 stages do that.
Well, let's start off with stage 1. That sounds great. As the sole individual that is searching for more and wanting to do more, but may not be well resourced. How might someone go through this 5-stage framework?
So yeah, I think the most important first thing is that spark, that passion, that kind of calling that this needs to happen, and that there's some sort of love and enthusiasm for that, because fear only gets you so far, as we have seen, with all the scary information that we've seen around climate change in particular. That hasn't been a major motivating factor for people. It has to be a love of this kind of transformation for the more beautiful world that we can create. So that first spark is very important, but there's a number of other things that are very important. One is to really read the field of your community, to get to know what's already happening and how transition group, whether it's called that or not, could fit into that overall ecosystem of what's happening in that community. So really getting to know groups that are working on aligned issues, really getting to know the community as a whole and what its needs are, and how could this group fit into that and really complement the efforts that are already going on rather than compete with them. Mm. And then from there, talking to some individuals who might have interest in working on this. This work is way too big for any one person to do on their own. So we need a good group of co-conspirators or collaborators to start off with. We often call this an initiating group. So putting together that group, and then starting to raise awareness in that community, both about the challenges that we're facing, that there's a real need for this, that there's some urgency to this, but also, what solutions are out there already. And this could be everything from, food forests to intentional communities to bus rapid transit systems, alternative energies, rainwater catchment, composting, that whole range of things, local currencies, local investing, really, showing what the possibilities are, that there are alternatives out there that are viable. And through that process, maybe hosting talks by people who are already working on some of these solutions, maybe showing documentary films, having discussions in the community, starting to get to know what that group is most interested in working on, and focusing in on where the leverage points are in that community. So that's a lot of the work of the first stage, which is the starting out stage, building a base of support among like-minded folks, individuals and groups, that can then carry into the next stage of the process, which is deepening.
This is great. I'm like furiously scribbling notes on my pad too. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a group. They're starting to make the dots of community needs. They're starting to showcase not just challenges and solutions. So how might they go through a deepening process at this stage?
Right. So this is really an organic process. This is how I observe that the process naturally unfolds in a community through my work with Transition Sarasota. So, we did a lot of talks and film screenings and discussions and so forth. But at some point, that's not enough. We got to move into practical action. And we got to build the foundations for longevity. It's not enough to just have a kind of informal group. We have to clarify how we're going to work together. We have to incorporate, start raising funds. And so the effort takes on a whole different character. For us, our first practical project was called the Suncoast Gleaning Project. It's still actually going now 12 years later, harvesting surplus produce from local farms and donating that to local food banks to help the food insecure in that community, demonstrating the power of local food to be able to meet real foundational needs in our community, to really make people's lives better and show that these aren't just idealistic or utopian strategies that only a small percentage of the population would be interested in. These are really practical things that could make lives better. So that project has now donated over 500,000 pounds of local organic produce to serve the food insecure in the Sarasota area. And even more than that, it's kind of changed the whole emergency food system in that area. That, at the time that we started it, it was a lot of, shelf-stable products, which often meant Captain Crunch and Hamburger Helper and canned vegetables and things like that. Over the years, it's moved towards more and more fresh produce, more healthier foods that can, address this problem of often having hunger and diet-related diseases side by side, diabetes and obesity and so forth. So I feel like that was a very strategic first project. It was also something that everybody could get behind, on all the way across the political spectrum. Is just clearly a good idea. And so we were able to, in a fairly conservative community that Sarasota is, attract interest from, everyone from the Sierra Club to the local Rotary Club. So deepening in that way, really proving that these ideas can work, and that we can, that this group has the ability to do work that's really transformative, which opens up a whole nother range of possibilities in the next stage of connecting.
Sponsor of ours. If you've been following along, you know that I'm a big advocate that our homes should be places of safety and a haven from the dangers of the world. But toxic chemicals are everywhere, especially in our homes. It's the paint on our walls, the floors beneath our feet, and even the tables we gather around can contain chemicals that pose serious health risks,
such as cancer and infertility. The EPA acknowledges that indoor air quality is 3 to 5 times worse than outdoor air, which not only affects our health, but also our productivity. I try to do the best I can to make healthy choices, but even as a real estate professional dedicated to healthy and resilient spaces, there's just so much more to know. That's why I was so happy to get introduced to the work of Wise Matter. Wise Matter helps homeowners, architects, designers, and contractors choose eco-conscious building materials, finishes, and even furniture that support optimal indoor air quality. Style does not have to be sacrificed when making these important decisions, and Wise Matter will work with you to find healthy finishes that achieve the aesthetic you desire. After all, you can't call something good design if it undermines your health or that of the planet. Wise Matter offers a free 30-minute consultation to discuss your home or project design. You can visit them at wise-matter.com. And Don, before we move on to connecting, do you see an overarching theme around timelines in which it takes to move from stage 1 to stage 2 to ultimately stage 3?
Yeah, I think, it's probably on average, it takes a couple of years to move through each of these stages. But there's really no shortcuts unless you have a lot of money or political influence, which often means having a lot of money. And even then, it's kind of like dumping synthetic fertilizers on your garden. It will provide some growth, but there's also negative side effects to that because you haven't really nurtured the soil of your initiative and of your community. So much more sustainable growth through going through this kind of process. And for most of us, who don't have those kind of resources, it's the only way that we can really do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. What comes up, and I know that we're going to get back to connecting, but time being such a critical element, especially for those people that I see that they may be really interested in, let's say a food forest. Like, wow, that's a novel concept. I want to do that. And then that missing ingredient being time, that it really takes to mature in there. But contrasted with, the media right now is telling us we need these exponential solutions now or yesterday. And I don't know where I'm going with that outside of just the framework is really interesting because it does seem like it really hinges upon an emergence in an organic process and really an enrollment process in which people can then go through to create more long-lasting change.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think the creative tension of realizing that we need to go slow and grow organically for something to be really sustainable over time, and the huge urgency of the climate crisis, I don't think we can throw out either side of that equation. We have to kind of live in that paradox. But I would say that, one thing is that we don't need to do it all ourselves. So we can't do it all ourselves. No one group can. So it's important that people are still working on, spreading renewable energy systems around the planet and financing those and pushing for legislative change at the national and international levels. All still very important. And we need this kind of bottom-up community-based approach, because what we see often is with efforts to get significant legislation passed at the national and international levels, that it's not happening. And, particularly in this country, we have a very close partisan divide. And so that makes it very difficult to create any lasting change at that level. It flips back and forth with each administration. So we really need to create the conditions from the bottom up for that kind of large-scale change to happen. Otherwise, I think, if, say the Democrats tried to ram through some really radical climate legislation, we'd see a massive backlash from the right. Just look at what's happened during the coronavirus. So, there's a lot of healing work that needs to be done, and I think that can't be done at these higher levels. It needs to happen from the grassroots up, and to build power that way.
Yeah. So, how about moving into stage 3? Which did you say connecting?
Yeah. So obviously, groups are connecting with individuals and other groups throughout this process, throughout the starting out and deepening stage. But what changes at the connecting stage is now that we've kind of proven that we can do good work that really enhances, betters people's lives. In the deepening stage, we built some credibility for ourselves. So organizations that may not have given us the time of day in the beginning because we were an untested entity now may be really interested in working with us. And this could be across the business sector. This could be in politics. This could be, other more established cultural and nonprofit institutions in that community, which can bring in additional expertise, resources, ability to reach much wider audiences, media coverage of what is happening. And I think something that transition groups are somewhat uniquely positioned to do, because transition is so holistic that it, like permaculture, it looks at every aspect of our society, can begin to kind of weave together these different organizations and these different sectors into a clear movement behind a campaign, behind a goal. So for us in Sarasota, some of the things that we were doing at this stage were putting together an annual Eat Local Week with dozens of partners to celebrate the best of local food and farming in our area, and getting these groups to get used to working together and getting the general public to see this as a very rich and diverse movement. We also launched Eat Local Resource Guide and Directory, the catalog that kind of mapped the whole local food system and made it easier for consumers to find local food and helped farms and farmers and farmers markets and restaurants that are sourcing local produce and grocery stores that are stocking local produce find those people who wanted to be part of this. And also setting this goal of a 10% local food shift across the entire community.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there was a study done back in, I think it was 2006 in Sarasota County. The local county government hired somebody who had a lot of experience doing economic analysis for local food as economic development. A guy named Ken Meter from the Crossroads Resource Institute in Minnesota. And he found that a small fraction of 1% of the food that Sarasota County residents were purchasing was actually coming from Sarasota County. but that food was nearly a $1 billion industry in Sarasota County. So almost all of that money was being spent on food coming from outside the community at big supermarkets, and all that money was leaving the community.
$900 million. That's incredible.
So if we could just make a 10% food shift, and we need something bigger than that, but 10% seemed like a goal that was not overly intimidating for people. They could go to the farmers market once a week and meet that goal. That would add $100 million a year to the local economy. And that really got a lot of people's attention from, our city and county commissioners on down, and helped kind of rally people around this idea of transforming our local food system.
Before we get back into this episode, I want to do a quick interruption to highlight the work that makes this podcast possible. The heartbeat of regenerative real estate is the incredible people that are focused on redefining our culture's relationship to place. From Latitude's growing ecosystem of mission-aligned businesses and organizations, to our community of real estate professionals that are best described as change agents. The work we are doing at Latitude is focused on transforming the built and natural environments so that people and planet can thrive together.
Here's a short message from Latitude change agent Azumi Tanaka out of Southern California.
I was trying so hard to build my real estate business as a green real estate expert for a couple of years. And I remember the first meeting I came to Latitude, Daniel was talking about how he's been banging his head on the wall. And I just said, it's exactly how I felt. But the first aha moment was the moment I saw the website. That was the aha moment. And then from that point on, it's like, because what I saw was, this is exactly what I've been trying to build, wanting to build by myself. And there's a whole group of people who are trying to do the same thing. And I was like, I'm in. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind in that first moment.
Okay, so we are now connecting. There's much more credibility of this group. Where are we going with step 4 or stage 4?
Yeah, so the connecting stage, where more resources come in, we have more support, we have more expertise, we're reaching a wider audience, gives us what we need to really start building important system-wide alternatives. So, these are the things that usually cause people to get started in this work. They want to see a whole transformation of our local economy, a whole transformation of our local food system, maybe projects like creating a local currency, or starting a renewable energy cooperative, or creating a regional food hub that aggregates produce from different farms and distributes it out over the region. But in the beginning, it's really hard to do that. If you don't have any money, you don't have any recognition, how do you get the support behind that and the resources that you need? So now, having gone through the first 3 stages, we have that, and we can do some of these kind of larger system-changing projects. We can go from being more opportunistic and kind of looking at where the energy is going and how we can harness that, to being more strategic in terms of, what is the kind of infrastructure that our community most needs to help to enable the other pieces of this to happen. So that's what's happening in building. And there's some great examples of this in transition around the world. There's, examples of local currencies that, like one in Bristol, England, where the mayor was taking his full salary in Bristol pounds, and you could use them to pay a portion of your taxes and to ride the bus. And it was accepted at hundreds of businesses, and you could get it out of ATMs. There have been other initiatives that have created these renewable energy cooperatives where they offered shares in the company to local people, and millions of pounds of investment came flooding in to put huge solar arrays up on project housing throughout the community and lower energy bills for the most low-income residents. Here in the U.S., Milwaukee, Transition Milwaukee helped to launch a victory garden initiative that has since planted, last I heard, over 4,000 gardens throughout the city. There's a local investing group in Port Townsend, Washington, that's now invested over $8 million into local businesses that couldn't find financing elsewhere, helping to grow the local independent business community and resist the chain stores and the big box stores. So interventions at that level are happening. Building low-income, affordable housing in some communities, or taking over derelict industrial parks and transforming them into green business centers. So at the building stage, those kind of things are possible. And the more communities that are operating at that stage and creating these large, visible changes that are really, altering the future trajectory of that community, taken together, they can really provide proof of concept for a whole society like the United States of America to decide, okay, this is a real alternative. This isn't just some kind of pie in the sky, hippie thing. This could really, really work. And that's where we can start to dare to dream about actually changing the world.
Wow. And does that lead into the fifth and final stage?
Yeah. So that's what I see it really about. Our work at Transition US is really nurturing these local groups and helping them through training and networking and support and encouragement to get to that building stage where they're really thriving and really making a huge difference. And then connecting them together and showing those connections and getting the word out more broadly. So now we've just embarked on a new 3-year campaign called Regeneration Nation, which seeks to make this vision, whether we call it transition or whether we call it regeneration or whatever, visible to the general public. Because right now we don't, going back to something I brought up earlier, most people don't see this, or if they do see it, they see little small examples in isolated places. But there's really, thousands of groups that are doing this kind of work all over this country. And if we could show that, maybe we could begin to move large numbers of people out of a kind of apathy and despair about the state of our world into inspired and engaged action. Because I think a lot of people, when you look on the news, basically you see that, the current path that we're on is unsustainable. And action is not being taken that is equal in scale to the challenges that we're facing. So it looks like, we're headed for a cliff. And most people think, well, what could I possibly do as one person? And yeah, one person can only do so much. But if we all think that way, we're in real trouble. So a lot of this is about bringing hope back to people, and real, grounded, rooted hope that a change can actually happen, that we can create the better world that we desire, the more just and regenerative world, that we still have that power within us, but it needs to be, in some sense, reawakened. And I think that's a big part of what that daring to dream is. It needs some encouragement at this point. But if we can do that, if we can prove that there's a viable alternative to the status quo, then I think, we can begin to move the national conversation. We can begin talking about this stuff at that level, and starting to really shift culture and politics and economics in that direction.
That's
big paradigm
beautiful.
shift.
And what an amazing framework. Do you think that those community organizations or even businesses that may have already formed and they're trying to progress down this path, like, do you find that they are really good fits to, maybe they're at the stage 2 or stage 3, according to the 5 phases of transition? Like, are they able to just plug into this overarching transition US framework or transition network if they're international, or do you really recommend them like re-examining phase 1 and go through these initial phases?
Well, I think if they've already done this work, even if they didn't realize that they were doing it, just because it makes sense, it's a natural way to do things. They don't have to do that work over again. I will say that, there's a linear aspect to these 5 stages of transition, but there's also an aspect that's not linear. They're like different threads running throughout a tapestry. So, you don't stop doing the awareness raising when you get past starting out, but you add on to that the kind of practical projects aspect. So, and you don't stop the connecting when you get into building, you're still doing that work. So, yeah, I think that a lot of organizations could, decide to adopt this transition approach, whether they're, an official part of our network or not, whether they call themselves transition or not. If it's helpful, use it. But I don't think that they necessarily have to either. I think that, sometimes, a lot of times, it's valuable to have organizations that are just playing a very specific role, that are just focused on one small piece of this, maybe. But I do think it's important that in a community, there is some group, there is some coalition or something that is looking at, how do we actually transform these systems? How do we get to the point where the whole community is proceeding under a different vision of the future and acting in accordance with that? That brings all these different pieces together and can show and can help to guide a movement. Because, yeah, if we remain just totally fragmented, then I don't think that's going to work either. So I think that there's a role, whether it's a transition group or not, helping to having the vision of these 5 stages, how things can evolve, and helping to guide the community through that in a conscious way.
Let's evolve this conversation into the book that you're writing. I'm really curious. Is it going to be about the transition movement, or is it going to be something else?
Yeah, so there's going to be quite a bit in there from transition. I've been doing this work specifically with the transition movement for the last 14 years. So there's a lot I want to draw on there. But it's also meant to be wider. It's kind of a handbook for people who want to participate in this great turning towards a better world, towards a more just, sustainable, regenerative society, and kind of gathering in, not just my experience with transition, but also my experience with more kind of political and social justice activism, and lessons learned from over 2 decades of practicing meditation and studying Buddhist philosophy, and working for Outward Bound and working with at-risk youth, and really just trying to help people on this path. Those who may just be starting out and may not have any idea where to start, to people who are, more experienced, but may not have, a lot of experience with this different kind of activism that's more around creating systemic alternatives and bringing communities together, and envisioning alternative futures. The working title is Evolutionary Change from Personal to Global Transformation. It's going to include quite a bit on those 5 stages and going into a lot more detail, but also looking at other patterns of evolutionary change, such as Otto Scharmer's Theory U out of MIT, Joanna Macy's work that reconnects, the whole permaculture design process. And something that I've noticed over the years is that these different models, these different frameworks, and there's many, many more of them, tend to really agree that there's a basic process of change that begins with letting go of our assumptions, what we think we already know, our kind of point A to point B mentality, and to go on a real journey to really immerse ourselves in, wherever our passion draws us, and to really, experiment and soak up, learn from our experiences and soak up the lessons learned, and, over time developing greater and greater clarity, crystallizing our ideas about how to make change, prototyping them out in the world, and then being able to help spread them to others as they prove that they work. It's transition, but it's much wider than transition as well.
This is an ambitious project. I look really forward to reading it and getting a copy. It'd be great to have you back on whenever you do finish it. I hope that the writing process goes really well and that you've got enough time and energy to do it. But yeah, it sounds phenomenal. And with that, Don, do you have any any kind of recommendations on if people wanted to follow your work, or just maybe any kind of recommendations of if somebody is feeling that spark with inside, where they might go to get resourced?
Yeah. So, first off, Transition US, transitionus.org, and Transition Network, transitionnetwork.org. From there, we both have social media channels and YouTube channels with, lots of great videos on there, and resources and how-to guides and stories of what different groups have done. Give you lots of ideas. But beyond that, some of my favorite other resources, if you're looking to learn about permaculture, I love David Holmgren's website, permacultureprinciples.com. It's a great place to start with that. There's a wonderful network here in the US called the New Economy Coalition that has hundreds of members working to create a more just and sustainable economy. I think neweconomycoalition.org. Could certainly Google it. I think there's the Foundation for Intentional Communities that's here in the United States and internationally. That's a great resource. That's ic.org. Just on and on and on. There's so many. I think the most important thing is to connect with one's own sense of purpose, with one's own passion and spark, because there's a million things that we need to do to create a better world. There's no silver bullet solution. We can take whatever our passion is and put it towards the vision of this just and regenerative world that we dream of. And we can learn as we go. We don't have to be perfect from the start. The most important thing is that we get started, that we don't end up doing nothing and getting caught in our own analysis paralysis. We can gradually grow what we do over time and eventually share it with others.
Okay, everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to another great episode. If you're not already a subscriber, please do so wherever you get your podcast. You can create good karma by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or sharing this show with your friends. If you're looking for ways to get more involved in the regenerative real estate movement, then you are in luck. We have a Facebook community conveniently called Regenerative Real Estate that you can join and be a co-creator with us on this journey. If you have a business or organization that you feel is aligned with our mission to use real estate as the catalyst for a regenerative future and would like to work together, then please be sure to get in touch. We are building an ecosystem to help amplify your work and message, where you can present to our community or sponsor the work that we are doing. You can do this by reaching out to us at team@chooselatitude.com. Last, and certainly not least, this podcast is enabled by the people that buy and sell real estate with us through our network of Latitude regenerative change agents located across North America. Our goal is to help transform homes and habitats, person by person, property by property, and we do that by combining the skills of a real estate professional with sustainable and regenerative consultation. It is time that we all start to live our values, and we hope to work with you on your next real estate sale or purchase. Okay, that is all for now. In the words of Paul Hawkins, remember that we are either stealing our future or healing our future. We are hard at work trying to do the latter. So until next time, be well.